Robert Sykes, personal injury attorney, thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Thank you.
As a personal injury attorney, what is it exactly that you do?
We take all kinds of cases involving injuries, mostly traffic accidents. We take medical malpractice cases. And when I was doing that kind of work, people would call me from time to time with police misconduct cases that resulted, for the most part, in some kind of an injury. So I got into that also.
Now, we see you fairly often on the news and in cases where your client has some kind of a legal claim against either a police officer or
Right.
a police agency of some kind. Do you not like police officers?
Oh, no, not at all. I like them, okay? Some of them misbehave. They violate people's constitutional rights. They use excessive force. They use force when they shouldn't use force. The law says an officer cannot use force at all if no force is necessary. If force is necessary, they can only use the amount that is necessary. Otherwise, it's excessive, and it violates a person's Fourth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. A right to a reasonable arrest, let's say, or reasonable force in this case.
Now, we see you on the news quite often.
Okay?
Are there more cases of police officers using excessive force nowadays, or are we just hearing about it more?
I think there's more of it. I judge that from probably 15 to 20 years of doing this work, and now fairly heavily. I think there's more excessive force than there used to be, and more than there needs to be.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because I get calls, I probably get calls, Bob, I probably get 15 calls a week. Now, we screen those cases, but some of the cases that I hear about, I scratch my head and say, why did this officer need to use force at all? I've got a case where a guy was getting warmer clothes on a few weeks ago when they had this crackdown on the Rio Grande area, and he and his wife were out on North Temple, and he was just putting a sweater on. Well, some officers came back, and this innocent encounter led to $120,000 of medical bills. They jumped on him, broke 3 ribs, punctured a lung. He spent 7 or 8 days in the hospital. Now, why was that necessary? And I just don't think it was necessary. He had no weapon, claims he wasn't violent, and maybe he resisted getting handcuffed a lot, but that doesn't justify that kind of force. And so I hear about these kind of things. Now, a lot of cases I don't take for one reason or another, and I hear cases about deadly force where people are getting shot, for insufficient reasons. An officer can't use deadly force unless there's an immediate risk of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or others. That's the simple rule. And I get these calls about people from widows sometimes, or the individual himself, that someone was shot, their loved one, their husband, their brother, their son was shot, and I scratch my head and say, why was that necessary? When I get the facts and I look at the facts. And so that's one reason I do what I do. A lot of people won't take these kind of cases, but we do.
So what, in your mind, is the correct profile of a case that you will accept?
Okay. There has to be a fairly clear violation of a constitutional right. Now, I'm talking about federal. We also have a very strong state constitution, and I can talk about that in a minute, but there had to be a clear violation of a federal constitutional right. Usually it's the Fourth Amendment, an unreasonable search or seizure or arrest, okay? Sometimes it's a jail case, and there's problems there with the punishment or the treatment, But, excuse me, with respect to point number one, there has to be a constitutional right. Now, sometimes people call me and say, the cop swore at me, or he was rude, or he wouldn't listen to me. Those kind of complaints do not implicate a constitutional right. And so I tell people, I'm sorry that happened, but I can't help you. That's number one. Number two, the right must be clearly established. Now, sometimes there are oddball situations that officers can't anticipate. So the right has to be clearly established, and that means, generally speaking, there's a U.S. Supreme Court case or a 10th Circuit case, or all reasonable officers would know that what they're doing is wrong. Okay? And that's the clearly established. And the third thing is, in the 10th Circuit, which is the circuit that we're in, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Oklahoma, and in this circuit, there can't be a reasonable good faith explanation. Okay? It wasn't a reasonable mistake. Now, that's the hallmark of a good federal civil rights case.
What about state civil rights?
State civil rights cases, our Supreme Court has held that in many cases the state constitution provides more rights than does the federal constitution. Okay? Now, we don't get a lot of cases filed in state court here, and our judges aren't as experienced with civil rights as our judges in the federal system, because they don't get as many cases. But we have very good and sometimes unique rules. For example, we talk about a unique rule in the state constitution. Our state constitution, Article 1, Section 9, I believe, forbids not only cruel and unusual punishment, but punishment in a jail or a prison that is unnecessary rigor on an inmate. And that means that that's unique to the Utah Constitution. It means that they can't use punishments that create an unnecessary rigor. And I've just filed a case like that in the past week. But in that case, and this is going to be more and more common, okay, an opiate-addicted person, heroin addict, age 21, 2 children, you know, gets arrested on a minor beef. It was a disturbance in a grocery store or a supermarket, something like that, and gets taken to the Salt Lake County Jail. And heroin addicts and opiate-addicted individuals have known problems. One of them is they can just get depressed and commit suicide very quickly. Well, the Salt Lake County Jail, at the time, and I think still, they treat all these people with an alcohol protocol, like you're an alcoholic. That's different than opiate addiction. Right. And my theory in that case was, and I think it's a good theory and will survive, is that that's unnecessary rigor, because these people, they're hurting. They're hurting, and they don't get treatment. They don't get their drugs. She had a number of drugs that were prescribed to help her get off of that addiction for heroin, and they didn't give them to her. And they put these people in the jail, Bob, and they take them off of a heroin addiction cold turkey, and they don't give them the treatment or supervision that they need. Now, I think that's unnecessary rigor under the Utah Constitution, for example.
Police officers obviously know who you are.
Do they? Are you sure?
Pretty sure. When you run into them out there as you're going about your business, what kind of a dynamic is there? I mean, how do you handle the inherent tension between you and police officers?
Well, this is interesting you should ask that question, because I get a lot of calls from police officers that have been abused or their rights have been violated by their own departments or their own cities. I get a lot of calls, and I take some of those cases. You know, I don't know. I try to keep a low profile. I try to obey the speed limit and not do anything stupid. I don't want to get myself beat up or arrested, you know.
Attract attention.
But I try not to get pulled over. But you know, the ones that I know are very considerate and kind. I think they realize that I have a job to do, and the kind of work that I do doesn't describe the mass of hard-working police officers. You know, they do their job, they do it well. I'm grateful for them. You know, I wave to them as I'm driving by, you know. But they do a good job, and they work hard, and they have a hard job, you know. And sometimes they just make mistakes, you know. They use force when they shouldn't do it. It's maybe not intentional, you know, but they still violate people's rights. And most of the time, those obvious cases get resolved. They get settled, you know, out of court.
On the scale of most trusted occupations and professions out there, journalists and lawyers wind up in the upper part of the lower half, which means that most people, there are more people that don't trust us than do trust us. When people call you and me, folks like you and me, opportunists and ambulance chasers, how does that make you feel?
Well, you know, occasionally I'll have a case, like one I'm going to file tomorrow, involving a dog attack. A
police dog attack?
Yeah, police dog attack that was totally unnecessary and caused serious injuries, $30,000 in medical bills. I showed you some pictures of that earlier. Yeah. And, you know, that case, you know, is a legitimate case. And, you know, when I read the comments that are posted on your website, a lot of the people, you know, say, well, that's some ambulance chaser, or sometimes they know my name, and they say, oh, it's Bob Sykes again, you know. And I think that most of those folks are sincere, but they don't know the facts. They don't know the facts. And there are many people that are so pro-police officer that they can't see outside a very narrow, you know, they have a narrow perspective, and they can't see out in the margins where a lot of these cases develop. And so I don't hold it against them, you know. I'm not running for office anymore, so I'm not looking for votes, you know. I'm looking, really, I do this because I believe in the Constitution, and I believe in justice for people that sometimes can't get it anywhere else. A lot of attorneys don't know what to do with these cases. I get tons of referrals from other lawyers. They don't know how to handle it or what to do, and there are very few that are willing to take these cases, and so I take them.
In our society anymore, one of the big sticks that people use to threaten other people is that I'm going to sue you.
Sue you, yeah.
Have we become too litigious of a society?
You know, I don't think so. You know, a lot of the statistics, if you take out collection actions filed by, you know, automobile dealerships and banks and stuff like that, you know, the litigation has actually gone down. The number of trials has gone way down in society if you look at those statistics. It concerns some of the judges because there aren't a lot of lawyers anymore that know how to try a case to a jury. I tried one last month, you know, but there aren't a lot of lawyers that can do that. Sometimes they advertise, but they don't actually try cases.
How did you do last month?
Unfortunately, I lost. It was a state civil rights case with a video, and the jury did not agree with me. But you know, you win some and you lose some. But I'm willing to go to court on a good case.
Because of what you and others like you do, there are sometimes police agencies that will change policies. How does that feel, having that kind of power to get a police agency to change a policy?
That is very rewarding when that happens. You know, and it's hard to know always what, how that occurs and whether it occurs or not. But you know, a lot of the police misconduct that occurs, I have noticed, occurs because of lack of training, inadequate training, insufficient review of their policies. You know, and I think when there's a lawsuit, and in particular a payment made, you know, I think they take it seriously and they try to be sure it doesn't happen again. I suspect, you know, and I've been told that by a number of persons that are defending the cases. So,
does what you do make police work more difficult?
You know, it's hard for me as a non-police officer to evaluate. I don't think so. You know, I think that when a police officer draws his weapon, for example, he should always have in the back of his mind, do I need to do this? It's what the law requires, that there be a reasonable officer. It's not what that officer thinks, okay, in his own head. It's what the objectively reasonable officer would believe. Is there a need to use deadly force, for example? Is there a need to use force at all?
That's sometimes a tall order.
It is, but they should always be thinking about that. I mean, they're given incredible power over people. They can shoot someone dead and not get prosecuted for it if they follow the rules, see? But they have to follow the rules. They have to know the rules and have training on the rules, not just once, but repeatedly, okay? So that when they have a situation, you know, they're thinking, hey, is there an immediate risk of death or serious injury here if I don't shoot, you know? And sometimes people of good faith can differ on that, like that jury last month, you know, in my case. But you know, they need to be thinking about that so they don't kill people or maim them needlessly, okay? They need to be thinking about that all the time. So I think it helps make police work better.
What is the most outrageous lawsuit you've had to file because of the most egregious violation of someone's either civil rights or behaviors of a perpetrator toward a victim?
Oh my gosh, most egregious. Well, one that comes to mind happened about 3 or 4 years ago in Ogden, and my client was, I won't mention his name, but he was pulled over for a minor traffic violation, okay? Minor violation by the Highway Patrol, and I think there were other agencies involved in that. He turned down an alley. The officer followed him, turned his lights on, had him get out. Now, this is all on video, okay? And they want to know, and he's with his girlfriend, and she's interviewed separately, and they're asking her if he has drugs, okay? And I think she said yes. He had a prescription pill. He had an opiate, but it was a prescription. And it was a summertime. It was like the middle of July, and he is in, I think he had shorts on and a loose T-shirt, you know, and sandals, something like that. I mean, he had hot summer clothing on, if you can understand that. And they were asking him to empty his pockets, and so he reached in his pocket or in his waistband, took a pill and swallowed it. And the officer said, spit that out, and jumped on him. And these other guys jump on him and start wailing on him, you know, for taking that pill, you know. And as they're wailing on him and smacking him, they say, quit resisting. And he's just sitting there getting beat up, you know. And they say, quit resisting. And I learned later that they teach that to the police when they're beaten up on somebody. They say, yell, quit resisting, so that it looks like the person's resisting, but they're not, you know. Now that's something that makes me very angry when I think of that, because I've seen it several times. When someone's not resisting, they're saying quit resisting as they're smacking them. And I thought to myself, you know, now that case settled right away. You know, we've defiled it, but it settled right away. But I think, to me, that's one of the most outrageous that I have seen. You want another one?
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
This one just got filed up in Ogden. But my client is riding the wrong way at 2:30 in the morning on his bicycle down a sidewalk. They try to pull him over. A cop sees him, tries to pull him over, and he doesn't stop. Now that's wrong, okay? And that is a misdemeanor, I'm sure. But he ignores several orders to stop. And finally, they call enough other officers, and they corner him at an intersection. He sees them ahead, and he says to me, "I just was going to give up." And so he throws his bike down, I'm talking about a bicycle now, not a motorcycle. Throws his bike down. He says, I assumed the position, and that meant that he got on his stomach, had some prior experience with the law, you might imagine. Put his hands behind his head and was down, and an officer came over and jumped on him with his knee, right into his back, broke 3 or 4 ribs, and punctured a lung, you know? Now, and I thought to myself, and unfortunately, that the camera only caught part of it, you know? And he's sitting there having trouble breathing, as he would. That's a life-threatening injury, by the way, to have a punctured lung. And he says, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And they're mocking him. They're mocking him. They're saying, oh, come on, guy, man up, you know. And then an ambulance comes, you can see it in the background on one of the dash cams, and they send it away. You know, they sent the ambulance away. And he continues to have trouble breathing, and he's in obvious agony. And they take him to the hospital, and the doctor says, you got to go to surgery right away. $30,000 in medical bills on that one, you know, $30,000 for a punctured lung and broken ribs, you know. And so that's another very, very obvious case of bad conduct, you know. And then they all had lapel mics, and they all turned them off. And I asked the sergeant why that happens, and he tried to say, well, sometimes for police reasons they turn those things off. Well, there's no reason to turn them off. And so, you know, sometimes I encounter officers basically hiding evidence like that. I mean, those mics should have been on. It was a legitimate police encounter, and they turned them off. I'm sure to talk about, what the heck do we do here, guys? You know, this guy's seriously injured. So that kind of thing happens too, unfortunately.
When someone is treated poorly or has their civil rights violated, they're in some kind of an encounter with a law enforcement agency, they feel like they've got a legitimate case, but they don't have the means to hire someone like you. Yeah. What should they do?
Well, if they have good facts, like we've talked about, they should call an attorney that hopefully does this kind of work. But a lot of attorneys will refer the cases. There are several out here that do it a lot, like myself.
To someone who will do it pro bono? Or?
Well, not pro bono, but contingent fee. You know, and most of my civil rights cases are on a contingent fee. You know, or sometimes, depending on the case, I might get a retainer up front, but then do the rest of it on a contingent fee. So if they have good facts, if they have a good case, if they've been seriously injured and haven't brought it on themselves. I mean, if they pull a gun on somebody, on a cop, or pull a knife, chances are they're going to get shot, and that's going to be legitimate, okay? But if they have a good case and they haven't caused it themselves, there will be an attorney generally that will take that case on a contingent fee.
All right. Robert Sykes, personal injury attorney, thank you so much for being part of 3 Questions.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay.